I'm starting. This is the fifth recording, and as I mentioned, I remember that where we left off last time, just talking about your overall career, the career of J.L. Cooper. What would you consider to be your greatest success, or the thing that you're most proud of?
Well, that's two different things.
Okay, then answer both.
I don't know.
That does not make for a good interview.
I know. Uh, uh, huh.
Would you like to come back to that?
Yeah.
All right, but both a greatest success and a thing you're most proud of on the one hand, and biggest regret on the other. And for now, I will move on, but I'm going to circle back to that. So you went to which college? I always forget. DePaul.
Yeah.
It was DePaul. And did you go to DePaul for law school also?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what threw me. Okay, and so I guess when did you start playing music? When did you learn? What was the first instrument you learned and played? And
soprano, a little tiny soprano saxophone, which I still have. I started when I was 3.
3 years old.
3 years old.
So pretty much that's all you've done is music your whole life. If you started at 3 years old, how? By the time you got to high school and stuff, were you playing in the high school band?
Oh yeah. What happened was I started with saxophone at 3. Eventually, my teeth fell out, and so I couldn't play the little saxophone anymore. So you got to take music. So I went to piano. I wasn't enthralled with piano, and then I started clarinet at around 11 or 12. And by the time when I got to high school, I was young when I got to high school.
How young?
I graduated. I was 17 when I graduated.
Okay. Well,
I was 17 when I graduated. So I got to high school, and I auditioned for the band and the orchestra. I became first clarinet player in both the band and orchestra. And then I was also in the marching band and the pep band. And then I started playing gigs with a band at the local parks. They had They had little auditoriums in the various parks. And I started playing in the various parks, and we're making like 50 cents a night, 75 cents a night.
So this was after high school?
This was during high school.
During high school.
Then I got to. Then I went to DePaul when I graduated high school, and I went to undergraduate for 2 years, and then got into law school. And I was where I went to law school was DePaul, and I went to both the music school and law school in the same place because they were in the same building. And I went to law school in the morning from 9 to 12, and then from 1 to 4 I was at the music school.
What you graduated college in 2 years, or how did that work? You were there for 2 years and then you started law school.
I didn't graduate. 2 years, and then I got into law school.
So you never actually graduated college?
No.
This is a revelation. Okay, so there's one thing I've achieved you haven't. That, I guess you didn't, well, it's not like today where you pretty much have to have a college degree to get into any law school. But you started playing...
Well, then you could get into law school if you had grades, sufficient grades.
Got it. You started playing at 3, so was it because you really wanted to, or was it because Grandma and Grandpa decided that...
my father was a musician. He gave me a little saxophone. I still have it.
Your very first saxophone?
Yeah, I still have it.
Incredible. Grandpa was a musician.
Yes.
I. What was his like, as far as you knew?
He was a very successful. Did you see the picture that's in the room?
No.
Here.
All right, I'll pause it. All right, go ahead.
I started playing professional music at 15.
And that's when you're doing it for 50, 75 cents a night?
No. I was doing the 50, 75 cents before that. When I was a professional musician, I was working for union scale.
So you started at 3 years old because Grandpa was a professional musician, and
Right.
he got you a little saxophone, and you started playing that. What age were you when you did you realize that you wanted to be a professional musician?
Oh, that was very easy. 12.
And why was that so easy?
Because I went downtown to Chicago, and they used to have stage shows in between the movies. So I went to the big theater downtown. I think it's the Chicago Theater. There was three of them. There was the Oriental, the Chicago, and the State and Lake. I think it was one of the three I went to, and I was watching a movie, and the movie ends, and the curtain opened, and there was a big band playing, and it was one of two bands, and I don't remember which one. It was either Horse Height or not Danny Kaye, Kay Kaiser. One of the two bands. And when I heard that band up on that stage, I said, I want to be there.
As a saxophone player?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. And I
okay.
started practicing 6 hours a day from that point forward. I wasn't never inspired by anything until that particular moment, that one moment.
And so that began your pursuit of a career as a professional musician. And
Correct.
5 years later, you were a professional musician.
Correct.
What did you do?
Well,
what was,
3 years later.
Oh, 15. You said 15. Then tell me about that. Like, being a professional musician at 15.
Oh, it wasn't all that dramatic. I was working Polish weddings and Jewish weddings and Italian weddings and Greek weddings and dance gigs at various places and ballrooms and things like that.
So today that would be considered a wedding band, but back in that era, that was just a band.
Yeah.
And was because this was.
Well, do remember that
So this was the 1940s.
Yeah, when I was in law school, when I graduated law school, I took the bar, finished the bar, and left the following day with a band and went to New York. And then subsequently got a call from another band based on the West Coast, and I switched bands and wound up in California the very same year that I graduated law school.
So I was going to ask about your transition to California, but before that, at some point you had your own band. The Jay Cooper and his orchestra.
Well, that was that little thing that you saw there. That was for the summers. I and several friends get in the car, and we, in sometime in the springtime, and we go driving up in Wisconsin or Michigan or something, and stopping at every resort and say, "Do you need a band for the summer?" And one of the places that said yes was a Barron's Resort in South Haven, Michigan, and so they said yes. So we got booked, four of us as the band, and of course it says Jay Cooper and his orchestra. That was the sign. Here we go. Fucking shit.
Hang on a second. I'll pause.
So we got the gig for that summer, and that's where I met your mother, in South Haven, Michigan.
Right, and you mentioned that story.
Right.
So this was about you're 15, so this is 1944.
Well, this is a little. Now I'm not 15 at this point. I'm probably 17 at this point, probably.
Okay, but in 1944 or 45, 46, pre-World War II, or right when World War II was starting, actually.
Started in 41.
Oh, what am I thinking? Yeah, 1941. So this is in the middle of World War II. That's an interesting question. I'm going to ask in a minute, but what was the goal? Like, in other words, like the goal today and the goal historically, at least since in my lifetime, has been to get a record deal. That's like what every musician wants to get, or not all, but obviously there's still orchestra, there's the LA Philharmonic and whatever. But most musicians aspire to get a record deal. If you're in a band or you're a singer, whatever the deal. Back in the mid 1940s, though, what was were people thinking like I want to get a record deal, or was it like
well, the record industry is not what it became later, but I didn't think about it. My ambition was to be a sideman. I just wanted to be in a band.
Be a what?
Be in a band.
Oh,
be in a big band. Not in. This is before rock and roll hit. Remember, rock and roll. Rock and roll basically is what killed the big band industry.
So what do you mean by that? How did that happen?
Well, because before rock and roll, bands used to travel across the country and work these big ballrooms, right?
Yeah.
I was with several bands. We would play ballrooms, and there'd be sometime with 1,000 people, 2,000, 3,000 people, and they're dancing. We were not. We did make. I did make a record during that time. I made a couple records, but as part of a band, it's just. I just wanted to be in a band. That's all. That was my whole ambition, to be in a band.
What about? Well, first of all, because I do want to follow up on the question though. You said rock and roll killed the big band era, but so tell me what your experience with that was, or what you remember of that era. And
well, when Elvis Presley came in, basically, I mean, before Elvis Presley was the Frank Sinatra era, which is the big band era, right? Big bands played behind Sinatra, big bands played behind Bing Crosby, big bands played behind Peggy Lee. Etc. When Elvis Presley came along, he didn't use a big band. He used his 4, 5, 6 pieces, right? It was rock and roll. And then, of course, Beatles came along and killed Elvis Presley. And so it was a different era now. It was no longer 18-piece bands. It was now 4-piece bands, 5-piece bands. Right?
And it was around this time, I mean, Elvis Presley... there were record deals before Elvis Presley, certainly.
Yeah, but the Bing Crosby made a lot of records. Sinatra made a lot of records. Perry Como made a lot of records. But they were solo artists, right?
So
They weren't groups.
when Elvis Presley happened, because in my era or lifetime, things that I've seen where musicians have had a significant impact, not so much just on music and the music industry, but broader than that, society, culture. I thought Madonna, was Guns N' Roses. These were bands that really changed societies, changed culture. What sort of change did you see in the culture of kids in the 18 to 24-year-olds or whatever, the music buying population and the younger generation? What sort of impact did you see that Elvis had and the Beatles had on the society?
They had gigantic impacts. For them, you'd be the Palladium Ballroom like you got in L.A. and the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago, and every city had ballrooms. Ballrooms where people went to dance, listen to music and dance. It was a combination of listening to music and dancing. And it was dancing ballads or dancing jitterbugs or something of that nature at the time. And people went to ballrooms to dance, listen to the music, but primarily to dance. They listened to their favorite bands, but they went there mostly to dance. Along came Presley and the Beatles. People didn't go to see them to dance. They went there to hear them. And scream and yell and carry on. It was a different experience.
Yeah, that sounds like kind of a seismic shift in the way that people consumed music, I guess, back back then or enjoyed music.
Well, and with Sinatra's early days, they went there to the girls particularly went there and screamed because Sinatra was very thin and very vulnerable, and he would sing these songs, the romantic songs. The girls would scream at the thing, but it was a certain amount of that adulation. But when the Elvis came and the Beatles came, it was a whole different experience. It was no longer the big band experience. It was no longer you go there to hear the band. You went there to hear this individual.
So, the Rolling Stones came around right after, very close in time to the Beatles, I believe,
Correct.
but shortly thereafter anyway. And by the time the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, did that become the trend as far as music was?
Oh, yeah.
4-piece, 5-piece bands?
The Beatles is what essentially created that that kind of that style.
Now, this one, just because we're on the subject, I'll come back to your history in a minute, but the popularity of the Beatles, is it fair to say that that's what led to the Monkees and the television show, The Monkees?
Yeah, I represent them.
That's why I'm asking the question. So tell me about that.
Well, nothing dramatic about it. It was just contract. My job was to just doing a contract for them.
But what you represented the group, the Beatles, the Monkees, because they were a manufactured act,
Yes.
weren't they? And who put them together?
The people, I think it was people at CBS, was it? No, I don't. Whatever the network was that they were on, I can't remember.
And but were they, if I recall correctly, they weren't actually singing on the album? Boyce and Hart?
No, I don't. It was Boyce and Hart.
That was actually singing?
I wasn't in the studio to know for sure, but that was well reported. Yes.
Okay. And so did you do the record deal for? What did you do the deal for the TV show or the record or both?
Both.
And okay, so going back, was that your first television deal?
I can't remember which came first, that or Get Smart. It's either that or Get Smart.
And I was going to ask about Get Smart, and since you mentioned it, let's talk about that. What was your role in doing the deal for Get Smart?
Well, I didn't do the original deal in Get Smart. I was the company there was a company called Talent Associates. They owned the rights to it. They're the ones who got it on the air. I didn't do the original deal. I came in and did renegotiation and took it on from that point. Turns out that Mel Brooks was one of the creators of Get Smart.
Did you meet him back then?
No.
Okay. So we'll come going back then to mid 1940s. You're you were passionate about music and playing music, but what then led to the decision to also go to law school at that time?
A Jewish mother and father.
Was that because they wanted you to have a backup in case the music didn't work out?
Correct.
What is?
I had no
there's your
desire
phone
to
again.
go to law school.
You what?
I had no desire to go to law school.
Hang on, I'll pause it. You had no desire. So, because you told me, I still remember, the fatherly advice that I got when I said I want to go to law school was, don't go unless you really, really want to go to law school.
Correct.
Why was that your advice to me?
Because law school is a pain.
Well, law school's a pain. Is being a lawyer a pain?
Could be, but it hasn't been. But it could be. But you got to really want it because it's not an easy profession. You got to really want it. Law school leads to a lot of things. I mean, ultimately, you got a lot of directions you can go when you have a law degree. So, but at the time when I was young, I just wanted to play. I didn't want to go to law school.
So you were playing in the bands and you kind of laid all that out, And you said that at some point you went on a tour and you ended up here in California, but on tour, right? Not with the intent to move here at that
Correct.
stage, right?
Correct.
So, what happened when you got to California? What made you think I wanna move to California and Los Angeles in particular?
Okay, it's a little more complicated. I'm sitting
I asked the hard hitting questions.
I'm sitting in Chicago and it's friggin' cold and snowy and damp and all that. And I'm listening to the radio and I'm hearing programs coming from California, and I hear the bands, and I said, God, I want to play with these people. I want to play with these people. I was hearing such great music coming out of the radio shows from California. So I said, I want to go to California and play my saxophone and live by the beach. I said, that's what I want to do. So it just turns out that, as I said, I was with this one band who was working the East Coast, and then I got a call. I was recommended to join this band, lost their lead alto player in the Midwest, the Henry Bussey Band, but they were based on the West Coast, and so I quickly found a substitute that my parents helped drive to where I was. I was in a recording session in Cincinnati, and I found the saxophone player in Chicago. They picked up the guy and drove him to Cincinnati. He came into the session, took my place, and they drove me to catch up with the band somewhere in the Midwest, which I can't remember exactly which city. And I joined the Henry Bussey Band, and 2 weeks later, I was in California.
Living in California?
No, I arrived with the band.
Yeah, you arrived with the band in California.
And so there was 4 of us, not from California, in the band. We flew. They flew Air Force plane, because we played at an air base, so the Air Force flew us from somewhere in Texas, I can't remember, to Florida, California. We all wore parachutes, by the way, and we wore these. It was a C-47 plane. We sat in bucket seats along the sides, with our seat belts on and wearing parachutes. And then we land in Burbank Airport. A bus picks us up, drops the whole band off at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. 4 of us weren't from here, so I bought a newspaper, and we went looking for rooming houses. And I found a rooming house in Hollywood, I think Vista Del Mar. And so I can't remember if we walked over there or took a cab over there. I can't remember how we got there, but it wasn't that far, about a mile. So we got over there, and we went into this rooming house. We got 4 of us, and then about a month or so later, the same band was going back on the road, so we went back with the band, and I used to put my card in, my union card, because I was a member of Local 10 in Chicago, and I put my card in 47. I wasn't supposed to leave town, but I did leave town with the band. And by the time I got back to California, I was a member of the Local 47. And then what happened next was I got a letter from your mother saying we're getting married on February 3rd.
You were just told you were getting married?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I showed up. It was a big wedding with choir and bridesmaids and all that stuff. And then I left the band in order to go back to Chicago to get married. And while I was in Chicago, I got a call from a band based in New Orleans, and I said, I don't want to be in New Orleans. I don't want to go to New Orleans. So I packed up all my belongings in Chicago with your mother, and we got one of those cars where you drive out. It's not your car. You drive out. You get paid to drive out the car. So I put all my records and my books and our clothes in the car, and we drove out to California, and I found an apartment with a pull-down bed on Las Palmas and Waring Street, right off of Melrose. And I said, I'm here. And I was 1 mile from the Musicians Union, and I couldn't practice in the apartment, so I would walk every day with my saxophone over to the union and take one of the halls and practice. That's how I arrived.
It's interesting to me. So, like, more recently, certainly as of, I don't know about the 60s, but the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, typically, to this day, pretty much, if you want to be in the music industry, you need to be in Los Angeles, maybe New York, and that sort of thing. But that wasn't the case in the mid-1940s, was it?
Yes, it was.
It was. So LA was still the music town?
It was, and New York.
Well, the reason I was going to ask the question is because you're so into jazz. Why did you not want to go to New Orleans? Because that's like the bastion of jazz.
New Orleans? No. New Orleans was the bastion of a certain type of jazz, New Orleans type jazz.
Okay.
Which was a modern form of Dixieland jazz.
And that didn't interest you?
No, I was interested in big band jazz, which was not in New Orleans for sure at that time.
Was the so when you got out here and you set up in the 1940s? Well, I mean, were there any?
I got here in 1951.
1951. Okay. Did you have are there any road stories that you have, like traveling with the band that like you have fond memories of, good stories?
Fond memories of?
Yeah.
No, my favorite story, which is a true story, was.
I would hope it's a true story.
Yeah, it's my favorite. Sometimes we were traveling by bus, sometimes by cars. And this time we were traveling by car. Oh, a couple of fun stories. So, we were driving by cars. Usually be about 4 cars to fit the whole band in. And as we're driving along, somewhere on the not west coast, but somewhere between the west coast and the Midwest, driving along, there's a car goes off the road, not one of our cars, goes off the road and rolls over down an embankment. I always remember this. We all jumped out of our car, go running down and see if the guy's okay. The guy crawls out of the car. I always remember this story. Slams his fist on the hood that was lying sideways and says, "Damn it, I just filled it with gas." I always remember that. I thought that was great.
Well, that is kind of a memorable reaction for sure. So you're here in 1951. You got your license to practice law in 1953. Sounds like you were successful as a professional musician at this stage, especially by 51, 52, 53. So if you're living the dream and you're successful as a touring and professional musician, doing exactly what you wanted to do in the big bands, why go get your license to practice law in California?
Well, I thought, well, I'm here. I was doing a gig in Vegas, and it was 115 degrees out. And I said, geez, I can't go outside every day. What do I do? Well, maybe I'll take the bar exam.
So you were in Vegas, though.
I was in Vegas. I wasn't living in Vegas. I was living here, but I was going to be in Vegas. It was going to be 115 degrees out. I said, maybe get the outlines. So I signed up for a bar review course, got the outlines. And so during the day, at night I'd be playing the gigs. I was at the Last Frontier Hotel with the Lorraine Cugat Band, conducted by Van Alexander. And during the day, I was studying for the bar exam. And my roommate was Glenn Woodmansey, a trombone player, very good trombone player. And he used to kid me all the time because he was going out to the pool and I'm in the room studying. Eventually he went to law school years later. And so I studied for the bar, came back to California as my gig finished, and took the bar exam. I said, "Well, I'll take the bar." Because guys that I knew who were getting